Welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here because, well, we are about to completely deconstruct everything you thought you knew about the traditional family. Get ready because the history and the future of how we live and love are way more surprising than you might think.
So, let's dive right in. Picture it, the classic 1950s sitcom family. You know exactly the one I'm talking about, right? Mom, dad, 2.5 kids, the white picket fence, the whole shebang. We tend to look back at this as the ultimate historical baseline of human kinship. But is this actually the way humans have always lived? Or are we looking at a total historical anomaly?
Here is our roadmap for this explainer. First, we're going to bust the nuclear family myth, then dive into the reality of marriage being about property over love. From there, we'll hit the love match paradox, tackle the modern care crisis, and finally, look at reimagining family and kinship.
Okay, part 1, the nuclear family myth. Deconstructing that 1950s ideal. Let's really look at this era we love to romanticize.
Now get a load of this number, 15. This is wild. That idealized male breadwinner nuclear family, it was only the dominant cultural norm for a freakish 15-year window, basically just between 1950 and 1965. It was literally a blip on the radar, made possible by super-specific post-war economic conditions like soaring wages and high union membership that actually let a single earner support an entire household.
When we zoom out and look at the broader timeline, it becomes crystal clear that the isolated nuclear family was definitely not the norm. Back in the 1800s, families were agrarian economic units. Women were absolute co-providers on farms, raising livestock and running operations right alongside the men. Fast forward to the Victorian era, and people were living in these massive extended networks, uncles, aunts, cousins, all nearby to share the super heavy burden of just surviving. Honestly, that isolated 1950s model, totally the exception, not the rule.
Which brings us to part 2, marriage, property over love, and the historical reality behind it. Because if you thought the nuclear family was new, wait till you hear about the origins of marriage itself. Historically speaking, marriage was a highly calculated institution. It was way more of a handshake than a heartbeat. It was all about power, property, and survival. Consolidating wealth, merging businesses, forming literal peace treaties between warring groups. It was absolutely not about the romantic pursuit of individual happiness that we prioritize today. Actually, marrying for love? Back then, that was viewed as a terrible, even highly dangerous idea.
As historian Stephanie Kuntz points out, through most of history, marriage was basically a calculated way of turning strangers into relatives. If you needed allies or you just really needed to ensure economic stability and cooperation with your neighbors, you married off your kids to create those crucial links. You weren't gaining a soulmate, you were gaining in-laws.
So, the reality is that the 1950s housewife model completely ignores thousands of years of human history. For centuries, women were essential economic co-providers, doing heavy labor like butchering pigs and running businesses. The whole concept of the man as the sole breadwinner, with the woman relegated strictly to domestic duties, that's a relatively modern invention that only really hit its peak during that tiny post-war window.
All right, moving on to part 3, the love match paradox and what happens when happiness actually destabilizes things.
About 200 years ago, the Enlightenment introduced this incredibly radical concept called the love match. The idea was that individuals should choose their own partners based on affection, putting personal happiness way above family duty or economic strategy. And traditionalists at the time, they were horrified. They accurately feared this would destroy the stability of marriage. I mean, if people married purely for love, what was going to stop them from demanding a divorce the second they weren't happy anymore?
And that leads us to this core paradox. The things that make for a really strong institution, rigid rules, deep inequality, making it incredibly difficult to leave, are the exact opposite of what makes a strong relationship. The very factors that make modern marriage this beautiful, fair, and loving relationship where individuals are treated equally are the exact same factors that make it a highly fragile institution. We made marriage infinitely better, for sure, but by doing that, we made it so much easier to break.
So, part 4. The modern care crisis and the breakdown of the nuclear model. Because what happens when that fragile institution inevitably breaks down in a society that built its entire infrastructure around it? Just think about the shift over the past half-century. According to social commentator David Brooks, the share of people living entirely alone in America has doubled. Time is essentially running out on the post-war model. People are marrying later, divorcing more, birth rates are dropping.
We're clearly transitioning out of the nuclear family era, but our society, it just hasn't caught up yet.
And this leaves us with a massive care vacuum. On one side, household sizes are shrinking, and the completely exhausting burden of unwaged care work is still falling disproportionately on isolated women. On the other side, the super wealthy can just go out and buy an extended family by hiring nannies and tutors. But for everyone else, the system is fundamentally breaking down.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, Reimagining Family and Kinship, Radical Alternatives. If the nuclear family is historically unusual, and it's clearly struggling right now, how are sociologists and communities reimagining the future of care?
Well, we have to look impartially at a provocative sociological theory called family abolition. Now, despite the really aggressive-sounding name, theorist Sophie Lewis explains this is not about forcibly separating people or destroying human bonds. Not at all. It's actually about dismantling the privatized capitalist model of the family. The goal here is to stop treating care as this scarce resource hoarded within private households, and instead make care universal and communized.
At the heart of this theory is a profound redefinition of love. Lewis says love is struggling for someone's immersion in care and their maximal autonomy at the exact same time. It's this utopian vision where true love means a person is fully supported by a broad community network, meaning they don't have to sacrifice their ultimate freedom just to survive.
In practice, abolition means taking all the beautiful things the family promises, like non-contingent love, safety, belonging, and turning society inside out. It asks a big question. How can we organize our communities so that absolutely everyone gets that deep level of care, not just the people lucky enough to be born into stable, wealthy homes? It's really about expanding the concept of family to the entire community.
And on a practical level, we're already seeing this shift. David Brooks notes the rise of chosen families. This was prominently popularized by the LGBTQ+ community in 1980s San Francisco, where people who had been cast adrift from their biological units intentionally wove together their own deeply committed support networks. They proved, without a doubt, that you do not need to share DNA to share the burdens and joys of life.
Ultimately, kinship is becoming an action and a labor, not just a biological automatic. Whether it's through multi-generational community living, intentional chosen families, or just expanding our concept of solidarity so we see strangers as kin, we are reinventing the village. Love and care are becoming active choices we make every single day.
To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with something to reflect on. We've seen that the family is constantly evolving, from a rigid property arrangement to a fragile love match to today's search for radical universal care. So, if family is a verb rather than a static institution, who are you actively choosing to name as your kin today? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.